So I will sort of review the agenda. We've started these foundational funded investigator calls with a kind of an overview of some science discussion. I think we end up kind of short on time, and something to kind of contemplate as a group is maybe foregoing that, maybe having 5 or so minutes with one of the particular funded investigations per call, because the issue is that as the agenda is shown on the screen here, we've got the 3 foundational science areas, 3 currently management-focused projects, and then some capacity building work at the center. In 2015, we're going to be adding 5 management-focused projects. That's going to be really packed agenda and really challenging to stuff that into 1 hour. So I think what we're going to do is transition, inviting those new projects to sort of give maybe an overview of their work in the next 2 monthly check-ins, and then just go for almost an entire once a month. If everyone could mute, there's a little bit of noise coming from the call, but because we don't have control of that through the WebEx, but we can unmute to speak up. We also have the participant list kind of showing here, so I think people can raise their hands, and we'd see that there on the WebEx. But let me dig into just some background information about interagency collaboration that we have been exploring. We're working most closely with, well, let me just go with this. It's kind of funny a little bit. And Bob Flynn here at the Climate Science Center put this together with us. So you see the CSC regions and other federal entities that have divided the country up into various groups of watershed, the National Climate Assessment. The sort of comical thing, maybe, if you don't laugh, you cry, is that when you combine those, there's about 150 unique polygons. So there's just, no one's really kind of, I don't know, inside the Beltway, maybe they should think about a way to do this that would be nested and consistent, but alas, they haven't. So one of the things that, we're sort of left ourselves, I think, to do this collaboration or kind of figure out what's happening on the ground level. I do think it works fairly well on the ground level, and my favorite quote is from John Gross, hopefully is seeing the screen. If not, he's on the phone, that agencies don't collaborate, but people do. And I think with that, living into it, we have established a twice yearly retreat with the staff of these 3 entities. So it's the USDA hub, kind of working with producers, whether it's timber or food, agriculture. The Western Water Assessment primarily concerned a lot with water supply, municipal water supply, timing of snow melt and stream flow. And then the North Central, where we deal mostly with natural resources, trust and endangered or kind of preserved species. So this is a graphic that Andrea Ray worked with Western Water to put together. She had a poster at the AGU this past December, just kind of showing how we are coming together and working along those lines to build a collaboration.
That's really cool, by the way.
Yeah, isn't it? It's
awesome.
Yeah, it's good to see, and we're kind of tells a bit of a story and shows the stakeholders. And I think so let me back up to this to say that all 3 of us, kind of independently, and with the National Research Council's guidance on climate change adaptation, say to start with the end user in mind. And I think that if you're going to start with the end user in mind, to think about what that means is that the best, you kind of got to meet that user where they are, and you've got to plug into resources they're used to. So if there's a land manager looking at endangered fish in a particular stretch of river, they're not going to go to the Agricultural Research Service, and they're probably not going to go to the State Extension Agency and Crop. They're going to go to Department of Interior, Fish and Wildlife Service. Likewise, if you're interested in how climate's impacting your soy, corn, and migration of those crops up north, you're not going to go to Fish and Wildlife Service. So, those people have trusted resources and trusted kind of connections that they make. And that's why we have multiple federal agencies doing climate initiatives, because we all have our trusted kind of groups or trusted stakeholder connections, and there's no reason to reinvent those. but there is some commonalities with respect to climate. So, bringing in calling the models to see what's the best global climate models for a given region is going to be relevant for any stakeholder. But then picking out kind of how those impacts models then proceed out to be something useful for those stakeholders. So in some ways, I need to find a better graphic, and I'm thinking kind of a three-way archway that has like climate in the middle, and then it has these three kind of things: working lands, natural resources, and water resources as kind of three other pillars that are sort of coming off of that. And that I believe that these boundary organizations, plural, is critical in any particular instance. That one organization isn't going to carry the boundary between the research and the users. That you need to think about, for example, the Intertribal Buffalo Council that we're working with is a boundary organization in some way, but they're sort of one of these stones in that arch, and we're another one, and then the landscape conservation cooperatives, and then the interdisciplinary centers at universities are a little closer, but then there's the researchers and the fundamental researchers that are doing that research. And so I think that these boundary organizations, plural, is required for any particular spanning across science and users. There's a paper by Cash et al., kind of from Harvard, that talk about unpacking a bit how credible, salient, and legitimate. I've heard Joe say those three before, or at least some versions of those. And then that this is kind of the issues for boundary organizations, but that in order to be viewed as credible, salient, and legitimate, there's kind of some things you need to do across those users, and this is kind of how they conclude at least that paper, and they've kind of come with different conclusions and different bullet points, but these seem to be particularly relevant to what we're doing across the Western Water and the USDA Hub, is that this accountability across boundary organizations. We have a university consortium, we have a stakeholder advisory group, so we have kind of like we're looking to span across those boundaries. Boundary objects, I think, in far too many cases are equivalent to websites. I think that we need more than that. I think you need, and we have the collaborative workspace at the Resource for Advanced Modeling. We have working with them on climate primers that Marian Talbert has done, that we have these trusted kind of things that can be held up, and both sides of the boundary can see them as common ground and kind of credible, legitimate pieces of information that both can kind of tap onto. The participation from both sides, again, I think with stakeholders in the university consortium, what we've done with some funding, what we might do with the climate toolkit might help with that. The selectively permeable boundaries is, I think, particularly challenging, but something we need to respect. That is where the university kind of can say, okay, we've kind of stopped, and now we can hand that over, or respect that then this is where someone else is coming in. Translating across boundaries and coordination, again, I think with our stakeholder groups and how we've set up our funding does a decent job with that, and I think the coordination with these staff working retreats will help with that as well. So that was kind of, I think that if I could, I got some, showing people my calendar. I will show you, just so people are aware, there's the Western Water Assessment as their website, the Great Plains Hub. You see they're exactly overlapping with us, except a little bit of the southern or eastern extent of the Missouri River Basin and Kansas, and the North Central Climate Science Center. The map of the center. Some low-hanging fruit or something just to mention as far as what we're going to be doing is, so let me just go to the map, and it takes a little bit of time, is the Intermountain West Climate Dashboard. Has been I think, well-received and is well thought out. We had a meeting last week with Jeff Lucas and the Western Water Assessment to think about two short-term objects. One is that we would point to this from the USDA Hub and the Climate Science and North Central Climate Science Center website. And then sort of shortly thereafter, in the near term, Western Water through Jeff Lucas, would add the states that are relevant to those regions, so that we would add the 4 other states that would be in there. And then all these are really just kind of posting to other locations, and there's another sort of serving up of the middle third of the continent through that same HP, the High Plains Regional Climate Science Center. But sort of just extending this to include the states that are falling within those 3 entities. So that's sort of a quick near-term kind of activity that's benefiting by that collaboration across the 3. And so that's all I had. I tried to keep it to 15 minutes, but I don't want to run out of time on the round robin. And I don't know if there's any questions on the collaboration. Why don't I pause for that, and then we'll hand it over to the, starting with the foundational science areas for an update. But let's pause for questions from the phone. Or comments. Okay, hearing none, unless someone is talking on mute, we will go turn it over to Dennis and Shannon on the adaptation team. We'll just do a round robin, hopefully have enough time to actually get to the capacity building.
Let me jump in real quick. Just I'm noticing a few folks still in the other WebEx room, and for those that can hear me that are in that other room and don't see the monthly check-in agenda, I've put the correct WebEx link in the chat box. So just a heads up.
My email too.
Okay.
So I'll start off. This is Dennis Ojima. Just kind of give a brief overview, and I'll turn it over to Shannon to get more specific with the adaptation activities. A lot of the things that we're doing is moving towards supporting various activities in sort of this adaptation realm, doing type of consultations with various research groups as they need it, especially looking at sort of the human dimensions, the social ecological area of how do we actually understand how groups are impacted, how do they respond to these type of climate changes, looking at doing various assessment activities, looking at multi-sectoral set of vulnerabilities at a state or agency level activity, and building critical partnerships and trying to make connections with different end users and trying to discern more carefully what their sort of decision-making needs are related to climate responses. And again, using a social ecological lens and looking at their adaptive capacity, their type of vulnerability or risk that they're at. And then there are a number of projects that Shannon's really championed and pulled together. And I think just ask Shannon to maybe just describe a couple of those as illustrations of some of the things that we're doing.
Sure, and I can link it also to Jeff's talk about how these different organizations are working together, because the way that they, of course, manifest is really at the project level. And so just a couple to mention a few activities that are going on right now. One is the project that we're working on with the Wind River Reservation. We've actually got a workshop there at the reservation next week, and we're working very closely with the National Drought Mitigation Center and with Western Water Assessment and with the USDA Climate Hub. In general, that project is to develop a drought preparedness plan, and it's cross-sectoral. So Justin Durner through the USDA Hub is going to help us with the agricultural component, and Western Water Assessment is coming in to help with the evaluation with Beth McNeish, who's actually coming to the workshop next week. And then the National Drought Mitigation Center and the High Plains Regional Climate Center at University of Nebraska-Lincoln we're working together to develop a climate and drought summary for the tribes that the workshop in part is going to focus on how to operationalize that summary for their upcoming irrigation season, so for their implementation of their tribal water code, which they start implementing decisions in mid-March. So that's one specific example. Another one is the work that we're doing with the Intertribal Buffalo Council. I've mentioned on past calls, so I won't go into detail, but we're also working with the USDA Hub and NIDIS and the National Drought Mitigation Center, helping them implement a USDA Conservation Innovation Grant focused on drought adaptation. So we're helping them review proposals that came in from their member tribes to do drought projects on various reservations with bison herds. And then lastly, I'll mention quickly the Colorado State BLM project that we are co-leading with Corey Knapp at Western State University in Gunnison, and that project is to develop a social vulnerability assessment and integrate that with the ecological vulnerability assessment that the Colorado BLM state office is doing to inform their state adaptation plan. And so again, that's in the really early phases, but we're talking to folks at the Southwest Colorado project that we funded, at USGS, at Western Water, and so all the different partners that might be interested in helping with that, and also building on the Colorado Climate Vulnerability Study and the update to the Colorado Climate Change Study. So,
Not going on.
yeah.
Just pause if there's any questions before we go to the climate group.
Shannon, what's your timeline on the BLM vulnerability study? It sounds great.
Betsy?
Betsy, yeah.
Hi. Yeah.
So the timeline is initially an 18-month study that we hope to start doing field research for this summer. Corey and I, with our grad students, are actually already starting to work on a review paper for that project. And then Bruce Rittenhouse at BLM has also asked us to scope out an additional 3 years for a phase 2. So, you know, all the caveats notwithstanding about funding availability. So anywhere from 18 months to 3 years at this point.
Great, thanks.
Okay, maybe Imtiaz will give an update from the Climate Foundational Science area.
Okay, thanks, Jack. So this is Imtiaz Rangwala, who's taking over the new kind of climate lead at North Central. And I have Joe here, and we both will try to fill in these different components that we just talked about this morning. So one of the big update that we're excited about is that we'll have another hand helping us do the climate work. We have a postdoc coming in who'll join in early summer, July 1st is kind of the date we have in mind. Her name is Candida Davis, and she'll be, among other things, working on issues related to hydroclimatic extremes, including drought, etc., and the research kind of relevant to the region, including a lot of stakeholder interaction. So that's one of the main updates.
I think you said that she's going to be able to attend the Open Science Conference.
Yes.
So people can look for her there and make the connection and meet her. So that's really great that even before she's starting, we'll.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Great. Thanks for filling that in. The one component in relation to usable science is the issue of developing climate scenarios for the purposes of decision making, and it's really just taking it from the work that I was involved with on the Southwest Colorado project, working with Betsy who's here and others, so thinking about putting a paper out coming from that work and the thinking behind developing that product in a more of an interdisciplinary manner, and just looking at how can we improve upon it. The other thing I wanted to mention was that there's a lot of conversation going about this new paper that came out looking at drought response under climate change in the Great Central Plains and the Southwest U.S. And so Joe, myself, and others at NOAA, Western Water, should think about developing a 4-pager that could just inform other users, including the boundary organization, about the implication of this paper and the validity of this paper. And so, I think we should come out with something soon on that.
I wanted to ask very quickly for people on the phone, how many of you heard about this latest paper by Ben Cook and others? There was a lot of press around it.
Yeah, I have. I heard about it at NPR, and a lot of people here are talking about it. I have read it.
We would appreciate, at some point, just getting your questions and your concerns so that we can address them when we write our little, note, comparing that to some previous results. So,
Be happy
if
to.
you want to send us an email or talk to us later, that would be good.
You want to add something?
Well, no. I mean, that's the main thing we wanted to talk about on that point. But just that we like your input and any questions on that, but just maybe by email since we don't have a lot of time in this conversation, unfortunately.
So Joe or Brian or somebody, could you just send out a citation to that paper? I haven't seen it.
We will do that along. I mean, it's not going to take us too long to write the briefing paper. I could send that out too. Yeah.
But just a URL. I can go look at it on Web of Science, but if it's handy, just send the citation.
Yeah, we can send that out today.
Thanks.
We'll do that. It's open access.
Okay. That's pretty much for me. Okay. Unless Joe wants to add anything else.
Work continues. Oh yeah, the other thing is last time I said work continues on our work on evapotranspiration. One issue that has come up, which I mentioned at the last call, was this idea that the way that plants respond to CO2 through CO2 fertilization and through stomatal resistance might influence the way we interpret climate models, particularly with regard to the surface water balance. This is a major issue that came up at the American Meteorological Society in a particularly provocative talk. We've done some more looking into that. I'm circulating, today I was circulating a small briefing paper that just says how do climate models handle this? And I actually came up with some surprises when I found that out, when I actually dug into the information. And what are the implications, at least qualitatively, for understanding the water balances that we are using from these climate projections? So it'll be a 4-pager. It's got the list. It names the suspects of what models do what, and I'll be getting. I said I would do that last time. It's not quite done, but it will be out soon.
Can I just make one quick comment about that mega drought paper? I might be restating the obvious here, but the thing that comes to my mind as you guys are putting together this statement paper is, as we're out working with stakeholders, non-scientists on drought issues, it would be nice to have a consistent message about what the implications are of that paper. But, as we're talking to people within the Intertribal Buffalo Council, herd managers, the people at Wind River, people who are not necessarily up on the science, but we want to just be able to have some kind of consistent message about that would be really helpful.
When you say consistent message, I mean, it's really dependent on the messenger, so we can have inconsistent message coming out of it.
I mean,
we as
a center, yeah.
And then across the hub, and we can coordinate with Western Water. And I think the white paper that you're talking about doing is a great step to that. And just with, everybody can interpret it, sort of, it's free to do what they want to do, right? But you giving us, the climate impact is giving us a white paper.
That has sort of a thumbnail message, like here's what we can say.
Yeah, and
great point.
Especially since they set themselves up in contrast to a couple of other recent papers. But to read through this is a chore, and we're going to try and synthesize that, we hope, into what are the main differences, why do we think those differences are there.
Mm-hmm.
They look at the southwestern U.S. and the Central Plains, and the messages I read in those are very different, but they don't read different messages. So we'll try to figure that out.
Yeah.
And we have to, honestly, we haven't read the papers that carefully to do this analysis yet. We only have our own first impressions.
Mm-hmm.
But it was definitely provocative, as you say. It got on NPR.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
Well, I'm guessing a lot of people at least know about it.
Well, I guess, Shannon, are there any very quick requests on there for what they want from us to do in that briefing paper? Again, just send this email, or once we send it out, you can send it back to us and say, please add this. We want to make it a work in progress to some extent. Okay.
Thanks.
Good, yep. And then maybe we'll go to the impact team. Andy and Richard are here.
So there's a lot going on with the impacts group, but I'll tend to focus on just a few of the items that are most germane to this monthly update. In particular, Brian, I don't know if you're able to
I'm showing control, but I can forward that slide to him.
Okay.
Yeah, Arjun's been working on basically identifying the places within the domain where we'll be doing vulnerability assessment as part of the project. The project overall involves basically trying to look at forest and grassland, habitat suitability under climate change as a basis for vulnerability assessment. And we're particularly interested in the public lands and the tribal lands and the natural cover types within them. But of course, those ecosystems are influenced by surrounding areas, and so we've been trying to define what you might think of as a greater ecosystem, or in the context of protected areas, what we've called protected area-centered ecosystems. You probably immediately have in mind Greater Yellowstone as an example. Anyway, this basically Arjun has mapped around clusters of public lands across the domain, the areas that meet our criteria based on watershed characteristics and based on adjacent habitat characteristics, and also on land use intensification characteristics. And we'd be quite interested in any feedback folks have on the boundaries for these areas. So this is that map, and you can see the colored blobs are largely centered on clusters of public lands. As we talked here earlier, it's pretty easy to think about Rocky Mountain National Park and the surrounding Forest Service lands as the core of one of these ecosystems. But as you get further out east in the domain, the clusters of public lands are a little bit harder to define. So in general, if anybody has suggestions on how to modify this map, we'd be anxious to hear that.
So I think let me just check. I think I understand this through conversation with Andy and John Gross, is that the analysis is done on this sort of, I guess, the larger, colored, and somewhat transparent, or whatever the
transparent, they are actually overlapped. Two greater, we call it greater wildland ecosystem. Just gave the name, but I don't know whether it is appropriate name or not. But many, the large polygons.
Then that's what you mean by large would be like this green area around
that
this
is,
reservation.
Reservation.
Right. So the
heading.
Okay. Yeah. There you go. So this is sort of, and you guys are doing kind of the analysis of land cover and climate and biophysical properties within those larger polygons.
That's right. So if the main interest is say on the Rocky Mountain centered ecosystem, we would basically be quantifying change in climate, change in land use, consequences for grassland and forest habitat suitability within that, and vulnerability assessment on the public lands and in the surrounding, and then providing that information largely to the public land managers with the idea that that helps them understand which elements of vegetation are vulnerable to climate and land use change, along with which places outside of the public lands might be particularly important for conservation in order to keep the public lands component of the system healthy. And again, this is an attempt to make the information that's produced by the foundational science portion of the CSC effort relevant to local managers, to try to not say, here's what's going on across the whole CSC, but rather, here's a focus on your place, hopefully because that makes that information more relevant.
Mm-hmm.
But we really like feedback and whether that is a good approach.
The areas that are excluded there, you're going to do the analysis there, you're just not going to package them for these? I mean, like the strip along the Bennett and Bowes in that area, Wyoming, and the little hole up in Wyoming,
So actually not, a few things would be done domain-wide, but the more detailed analyses would focus on these areas.
There's always going to be a problem that crops up in those areas that you don't look at, right?
One thing that comes to mind, just a quick comment, we can talk more about this later, is how do we think about the coordination effort with existing assessments that are going on? Like, for example, I mentioned the Colorado assessment that's going on. They're doing an ecosystems vulnerability assessment right now. They're going to be interacting with managers. There was also the BLM Rapid Ecosystem Assessment. They're out doing workshops. So just thinking about coordination with those efforts and making sure that we're not at odds or stepping on toes and, in fact, leveraging what each other has done. That's one thing that comes to mind just from the sort of end user, manager, user sort of standpoint.
What would be a good way to have those types of discussions to get the map?
This is Geneva. May I chime in with a connected question?
Yeah, sure.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
And this came up actually when Jeff made his introductory comments on this call, but I'm curious if this is an opportunity to think also about our LCC sort of member partners with this Climate Science Center, because a couple of things that you just said, Andy, one talking about what types of clusters or areas make sense, but then also how do you connect to more local, place-focused needs and uses of information. And so I just wanted to throw that into the conversation because it's something I've been thinking about a lot. How do we leverage and coordinate, as Shannon asked, specifically with potential LCC partnerships?
Yeah, and I think that for the sake of time, I think maybe we'll move on, but table that. The foundational science areas are together this afternoon, and this whole list of kind of prioritized areas, integration with existing work, and then listing, there's the other 5 new projects that are coming online, and then prioritizing across the landscape with this.
An easy thing we could take on just to start to catalog the existing projects, work with some of the students.
Yeah.
Map, catalog and map them and who's doing what and all that kind of stuff.
And there's the BLM project in Colorado, but we also help the Colorado Natural Heritage Program with their state wildlife action plan.
Which is related to the BLM project they're building on that.
A lot of moving parts.
Yeah.
And no small task to figure out how we connect all those.
Yeah.
Something that we need to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think...
Hey, Jeff and Andy, can I interject for a minute? This is Diane.
Sure.
One thought that comes to my mind as I'm sitting here in one of those places that doesn't have any federal lands on the map is that I think it's great to look at all those connections between these federally owned lands and tribal lands, but I think it also is pretty striking that we need to figure out how to deal with some of these other states to the northeast that just don't have federal lands, and they're still part of this larger region that we're talking about. So just as kind of a food for thought sometime in the future, thinking about large land holdings by private landowners or nature conservancy or something like that as being another layer in a set of maps like this to think about the opportunities for collaboration along those routes, I think would be worth doing.
My internet just died. Good point.
You can plug in directly.
And I think that that the David Hennessy newly funded project on land swapping in and out of conservation reserve in the agricultural area will bring in the southeast part of the domain that we could think about. So,
okay, sounds good.
yeah, stay tuned on that.
And there are wildlife
Thanks.
reserves. Important, really, for birds at least, that I know of.
So I don't know. Are people seeing the map? I kind of think I lost the WebEx.
It went away.
With that, though, let's. I'd like to swap because we had quite a bit of action this last week on the phenocams to get the capacity building set of talks up next. To sort of, they seem to end up getting cut off. So let's try to go through those quickly. Brian Miller has been stepping on board to manage the phenocam deployment, which is an interesting thing with respect to those polygons, because it'd be interesting to see how those map our phenocams to the region. And then we've got Diane Davinsky on the call and Bex Neely, because those are some of the new camera deployments. So maybe I'll just give you, hand it over to I log in here.
Yeah, so this is Brian Miller. So I was actually supposed to miss today's meeting and be in D.C. for America View's winter business meeting yesterday and today, but the weather and the shuttle company conspired to keep me here in Fort Collins. At any rate, Jeff and I in Geneva did plug into the meeting yesterday remotely and sort of gave an overview of our vision for sort of the short, medium, next couple of year strategy for phenocam deployment and analysis. We have cameras right now at various stages. There's some that are operational, some that are being tested, some sort of being deployed and planning for other deployments. And I guess our shorter term, sort of short fuse tasks are to get a couple more cameras out by spring green up here. We've been in touch with Diane recently about cameras in Iowa and Grand Teton National Park. I know in the past Betts and others at TNC have expressed interest in getting some in the Gunnison Valley, and so that's sort of in the works. We're also working with America View on soliciting a couple of student awards for the summer, so they could start to look at sort of unique stories coming out of the existing phenocams, and also to write up sort of a summary document of the sites that are in place and what we're seeing sort of to date. And then ultimately, sort of in the fall kind of time frame, the CSC would work with America View on a broader summary report of the phenocams. And so I think Jeff's bringing up here, this is the National Phenocam Network's webpage, and you can kind of see the distribution of core and affiliated sites here, and I think he had Geneva's QuickBird site up there a moment ago, so you can hop on their website, go and take a look at the most recent shots from her camera down in southwest Wyoming, and also go back and look at a log of images through the past couple of months. But you can do that for the various sites. And so this project really requires kind of working with a number of other organizations. I've mentioned America View, and then here you're seeing the National Phenocam Network. The two other big organizations that started to sort of bring up some ideas of how we might connect with them are the Committee on Earth Observing Satellites. So, thinking of phenocams as a sort of in situ reference and maybe validation source of data for then thinking about, well, if we've got a phenology product, a remote sensing phenology product, how can we use these cameras as either maybe a way to reference or validate those data, or get more nuanced pictures. So here, we can see sage sticking up through the snow, but then in the springtime, there might be green up of sage and green up of vegetation between the sage, and this could happen at different times or at different rates. and thus influence mule deer migration, for instance, which is something Geneva and Matt Kaufman are looking at. So each site will presumably have its own kind of unique stories and information, and that's what we want to sort of start to illustrate here over the summertime kind of time frame with an intern and a couple of students. And then the final organization I'll mention here is the USA National Phenology Network, as opposed to the National Phenocam Network. And they largely are focused on citizen science observations of phenology across the U.S., and so citizens can upload their observations to their data set. We're working with Haskell Indian Nations University on doing that at Haskell and elsewhere. But the idea would be, can we kind of co-locate that data collection with Phenocam, so we can have these sort of on-the-ground citizen science observations affiliated with Phenocam sites and maybe also affiliated with a particular climate zone. So that's sort of a lot to throw at you, but that's sort of what all of the balls that we have in the air with the Phenocam capacity building work.
Any questions on the Phenocams? I think it's kind of like something that we can be proud of, is that there was two yellow boar sites in our region before we started this, Kanza Prairie and Niwot Ridge, and now we've extended to Geneva site, North and South Dakota, and Nebraska, and Diana's working on one site in Wyoming, another one in Iowa, and just a heads up for Diana, and then in the Gunnison Basin with Nature Conservancy, and just a heads up to Betsy and Diana, we're iterating with the National Phenocam Network, make sure we're ordering the equipment, the latest and greatest, that's consistent with their software that they're putting online, and try to work on getting those ordered within a month or so, and then getting them configured and sent out to people. So we'll just this year. So Bets and Diane, please stay tuned on that. Those cameras coming your way.
Thanks.
What is the temporal frequency of the photos and the visuals?
I think they're every half hour.
Yep, I think that's right.
You can program it.
Yep. Do a different rates, I believe, and Geneva's really been down and getting her hands dirty with getting this camera set up, so she could speak to it probably more than I could. But so this, I should add too that some sites some are very remote, like hers has solar panel power, batteries, and a cell phone modem to upload the data. Others are like at AirOffs or plug straight in, and so for instance, she's missing some images here because it's a remote site. If power goes down or the cell phone modem acts up, you'll have some blank spots. But he's been working through those kinks and having it running. So yeah, is it every half hour there, Jeff? Yeah.
Looks like it, yeah. And one of the things we might want to do is not take pictures at the time to save on the solar power deployment. But anyway, that's good. So there's been a lot of activity with America View, and it's a USGS-sponsored program. Maybe transitioning to America View in part to be a ground-based reference network for the U.S. That would then plug into the Committee on Earth Observing Satellites and tie into NASA and USGS's mission with respect to remote sensing. Anyway, so that's good. I think I don't have much to. Well, let me just go on training if I could, unless there's any questions on America View or Phenocam. And I think the indigenous. Brian mentioned that, not a lot to report there. We are making progress on the climate smart conservation. We're calling it combined tribal and Bureau of Indian Affairs consultation as opposed to training. We're working with Dr. Valerie Small, a recent PhD out of CSU, who's also Crow, to negotiate kind of a contract with her to help us set up that training, and the National Conservation Training Center. To do that, it will be in Rapid City, South Dakota, the last week, I think 28th, 29th, and 30th of July. So perhaps the Mountain Utes could come into that. I don't know how much we want to reach out. We're focusing on the Northern Rockies and the Great Plains regions, which are Wyoming, Montana, North and South Dakota. The BIA, they're sponsoring the travel, and they're sponsoring the NCTC's trainers and the facility for the workshop. So that's going to be kind of tribally focused climate smart adaptation. Okay.
They are in a different region, though.
I know. And Marcy Bidwell and Renee Rondeau and the BIA representative for the Colorado and New Mexico were at the Climate Smart Conservation that I attended last January, or last month, and so are aware of it and kind of how it could be modified. So I think, it's a little bit far afield, but I don't know, Ute Mountain Utes in that part of the world are a little bit in the sort of no man's land between a lot of different regions, so it might be relevant to bring them on board. Why don't we change gears then? We've got 10 minutes to wrap up with the management-focused projects. I guess just, the relevant updates across the groups. We'll, again, put Andy on the spot.
So for the white bark, our social science team of Liz Shanahan and Helen Naughton have developed a survey to be sent out to folks across the 3-state region surrounding Yellowstone, basically trying to get information that would be relevant to public land managers about public's concern about loss of white bark under climate change and interest in various management strategies and acceptance of various management strategies in different federal land types, including, for example, wilderness areas. So very interesting topics for which probably the survey will be relevant to broader climate change issues, with white bark being more or less kind of an initial focal species. And then additionally, the group has been doing some, I think, very interesting work on how can various types of be used to inform the development of a spatially explicit management scenario for white bark across Yellowstone. And so that's including the work of 4 or 5 groups of scientists that relate to climate suitability for white bark pine itself, climate suitability for mountain pine beetles, basically topographic effects on potential future fire, and then also climate microrefugia. And again, it's all aimed at how might you integrate all that information to actually decide what's a good place on the ground to plant white bark pine, with the hopes that 50 years from now, those planted stands will have suitable climate for white bark, will not be over inundated by beetles, will not undergo severe fire. It's actually pretty difficult to pull all that together, and so we're enjoying sort of working with this broader group to try to figure out how to do it. So those are the kind of the 2 main current thrusts on the white bark project.
Can I ask you, do you have a review process for that? Like, for example, you bring this all together to have other, outside people look at this, or not, when you put this idea together?
Well, that would be good to do. Right now, we're largely working with the white bark pine subcommittee from the GYCC. They're kind of they're working closely with us to develop it in ways that are relevant to them. But once that's done, it would be, I agree, it'd be really nice to ask a broader group of people to have a look.
And having been on some of the calls that Tom Olaf was organizing with comparing these modeling, the white bark pine, the fire, the mechanistic models, there's plenty of critique within the group.
Okay, well,
Let's just say that everybody's kind of got their own sort of dog in a fight, so to speak, in a research sort of congenial way. So this isn't, anybody sort of on high saying this is how we're doing it. There's various pieces, and they all kind of have an interest in defending kind of their approach, a healthy interest. And so it seems to me there's a pretty good mix of kind of review just internally. I don't have to add to that, but I think in a healthy way.
And I would just say, you might all think about this is coming to your life soon.
Coming to us.
As each of our
region near you.
climate science projects progress, inevitably many other people's projects progress, and then the managers pretty much say, hey, don't just tell me your stuff, tell me how to integrate it with everybody else's stuff.
Yeah.
Which again is, as Jeff says, very challenging, but which is needed and interesting.
Well, yeah.
You know, Andy, along those lines, in the earlier discussion on developing climate scenarios, those kind of climate scenarios are like the driver table that we've done a couple of them of, are probably common to pretty much every one of these studies, that's something that, you know, people need for the workshops, and that's what those climate, to some extent, the climate graphics that Marion's been working on were, you know, targeting towards a piece of that. But it would be really nice to be thinking if we could perhaps work with some real climate scientists to have at least a standard product like that for some kind of climatically coherent climate zones. And I don't know if those would be like neon climate zones or probably something smaller than that, and thinking, you know, maybe not do them for all of them, but, you know, this idea has come up a few times, and it was, you know, part of that was part of the recent proposal we put in. I'm not sure how much of that's in the proposal that Brian and Nick and others put in, but, you know, that would be a really nice product that would require participation by probably every project that the CSC is funding. Not very much participation, but just kind of, you know, put together a form and say this is what a driver table would have in it, and then kind of pass it around and say, does this look like it meets the needs of your projects or your stakeholders? And that could be a really nice thing that could be done at a fairly broad scale and bring some collaboration and consistency. And I think the managers would really like having something that showed that these different groups were actually talking with each other and kind of came from a similar position where that was possible.
Yeah, that's a good point. We'll stay in touch on that. Why don't we move on, just in the interest of trying to round out near the hour. Thanks, Andy. And I think Susan's on?
Yep, I'm here. And let me just quickly give an update of the various facets of our project on surrogate species. Just as a note, we are now using the climate projections, the CMIP5 collections in all of our analyses. So Benjamin Rashford and Gordon Reese are working on the economic component of it, and they're currently in the penultimate stage of the land use modeling. So Gordon has finalized the data sampling process. He's drawn alternative samples of land use observations that reduces the statistical issues that have been found with the satellite imagery data, meaning spatial autocorrelation and misclassification error. So they've spent a lot of time on that, primarily in response to, you know, some of the discussions about these misclassification errors up in the plains. So they're managing that quite well. Ben is finalizing the code to estimate the base land use model, which will predict land use conversion probabilities as a function of economic, biophysical, and climate characteristics. And then they're going to be using that and forecasting under alternative climate scenarios for integration with Valerie Steen's models. So Valerie she has done a first round of vulnerability assessments for breeding birds, and she's now rerunning those using the new climate variables and including the PET that Helen derived from the hydrological output she got from Andy. So Helen had been working on that for some months, and now we can incorporate that in Valerie's models. And she's getting everything lined up so when she gets the new projected land use coverages from Ben, she'll be ready to roll. She's also working at the same time towards developing parallel type species distribution models for en route migrants, not just the breeding birds, but the en route migrants, based on our own field data from the region. And she's going to be using a hierarchical Bayesian approach on that. So Helen is currently working on analyzing surrogate relationships using two different methods. One are clusters produced by hierarchical agglomerative clustering. I like that term. And it's based on abundance data. And then she's also using a second method that's referred to in the literature as species archetype models that cluster species according to their responses to variation in land cover and climate covariates. So she'll actually be looking at responses, not just abundance patterns. And then she's going to compare those two methods and evaluate the benefits of including that covariate information. She's really in the throes of running that now. The species architect models are quite new, and she's learning how to do that and kind of in the throes of that. When Helen finishes that, then Valerie and I will take those clustering results, assign surrogates, test against the new versions of Valerie's vulnerability assessments, and proceed on. So throughout this project, we've been in communication with the land managers associated with our project, the LCC, the joint ventures, and also the Fish and Wildlife Service National Resource Program Center that's involved in monitoring, and that includes the refuge system. Helen is presenting a seminar here tomorrow on her approach to the surrogates, which a lot of the Fish and Wildlife Monitoring folks are very interested in. And many of the land managers will be in attendance either in person or that. And we're also planning on holding a workshop this spring to communicate with the managers at this stage of the project to cover all aspects of our project. So I think we're rolling along well.
Susan, is that Helen's talk, will that be available via WebEx?
Yes, and I think I sent that to you, and I can send it again. If anyone wants to zip me an email and get the WebEx information, I'd be happy to send it out.
If you could, on the chat window to everyone, while we just wrap up with the social ecological resilience in Southwest Colorado, you could post it there. People could just grab the WebEx from you while we're on the call, and it's in their mind. Or write to Susan with the email. That archetype modeling is pretty interesting when you talk about multiple species across the landscape. So it's something I think we're interested in bringing into the viz trails, possibly, and integrating within the resource for advanced modeling. Yeah, and I think Helen is definitely planning on doing that. So that'll be wonderful to have that support. Great. So I think Betsy looks like she's still on. I guess she's the representative from the Southwest Colorado project. And we're running a little bit over time, but if you could give us a quick update, we'd appreciate it.
Yeah, just briefly, sorry Renee and Marcy couldn't be here. They're down meeting with the Mountain Utes today, and I believe Nina's at a training. And we held our PI meeting in January, and we reviewed all the results that have been produced to date, mainly the climate scenarios that MTS has kindly developed for us, the social science work of Katie Clifford in the Gunnison, and she's a CU graduate student working with Bill Travis, and then the Lori Young's work in the San Juans. And so that was great just to see all the preliminary results. And then Renee presented the results of the ecological response models for the 3 climate scenarios that we developed with our partners last November, and we've been refining. And Renee has been working with Jeff and others to develop bioclimatic models that our partners want, and we're hoping to be able to feed that into the process as well. And the main thing that we're working on now is developing these what we're calling social ecological response models, so that we can better understand the interactions between the social and ecological pieces, and also to help us identify intervention points for developing adaptation strategies. And we're planning a workshop in April in the Gunnison, and there'll be a workshop right around then in the San Juans. And we've been working closely with Rudy Schuster and Nina Burkhardt and others, Renee and Marcy, to develop this model, the process for the model. And we've been it's not quite ready for prime time, but it's going to be kind of a hybrid between the chain of consequences that Rudy's used in the Gulf, and then the Conservation Measures Partnership and Foundations of Success have used for analyzing the situation for planning. It's called situation analysis. And So we're refining that now. We'd love to have input from Shannon and others to help us make sure we're thinking of all the right components there. Well on our way to planning these workshops, and there'll be just about 20 people for the spruce fir, 20 for the sagebrush, and then they'll have one for PJ and Seeps and Springs in the San Juans. So we're moving right along.
Yeah, great, and it has been fun to work with Renee on that impact modeling. I'm really looking forward to the social ecological response modeling. And
yes, we are too.
Wildlife conservation societies, scanning the conservation horizon, and from the adaptation lead, and Shannon's comments is that it doesn't bring a lot of the social component to the response modeling. So that'll be interesting to see how that plays into the modeling.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Hey, Betsy, is that, are the materials or some kind of review or something, paper from the January workshop available, or are they on Confluence? Because it would be great, especially as Corey and I are working on this BLM project and talking to Renee and Marcy about maybe working with them in the San Juans and the Ute Mountain Ute and all that to see sort of the update of where everything is.
Yes, we can send the notes, and then we just have notes and action steps and a number of papers that we discussed, and I'll send those out to you.
Okay, that'd be great. Thanks.
I saw something posted from Nina on Confluence as well.
Okay.
So they're
okay.
I check there.
Okay, I'll check in with you guys just to make sure that we have whatever we should. Thanks.
Great, and we can send our next version. We're going to be discussing it next week, and we're writing it up now. What the process is, the objectives, and what we're really trying to accomplish with these, what we're calling social ecological response models. We love your input.
Okay, thanks, Betsy. And I think we'll sign off. Sorry we ran a little bit long. Here is the list on the WebEx of the funded projects in 2015. I think what we'll start, I'm trying to be sensitive to not ask people to do much before funding arrives, but I believe Steve Hostetler and Amy Simstad, since they're USGS focused, those are change of allocations and actually have funding in place. So we'll at least start with those two next month and maybe invite all 5 people to attend. Hopefully the hour is understandable and they can make it, but then maybe starting with these two, the Steve Hostetler and Amy Simstad, and then in March and in April have reviewed the other 3. So.
Okay, and this is Susan. Let me mention I did, as Jeff requested, post the WebEx connection information on the chat box. And if you can't grab it, just email me, scoggins@usgs.gov, and I'll send it to you.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Susan. And I think we'll sign off.
Can I ask one question? I see Steve Running's on the call, at least on the list. Steve, if you're there, we might need to connect a little bit on the downscaled product. And any other questions you might have, we should probably set up a call between us and your group at some point. That's just a request if you're still on the line.
Yeah.
That's it.
Okay. Great. Well, thanks a lot, folks. A lot going on, a lot of moving parts, and these monthly calls help, so appreciate the time, and look forward to talking to everyone in March, and we can communicate via email otherwise. Right. Thanks.
Thanks a lot.
Bye, all.
Bye.
Bye.